Naaman was an important man and a triumphant soldier in the Aramean army. Yet despite his success of rank and his favor with the king, he had discovered a spot of leprosy on his skin. This spot was a life sentence, for he knew that at some point it would overtake him and isolate him and cost him all that he had gained. It set before him a looming vulnerability. His wife's servant was a captive slave from Samaria, and she knew of the prophet Elisha and urged Naaman to make the journey to visit him. Through letters to kings and political channels, Naaman set out and finally found himself at the door of Elisha's house. He did not arrive as a man on foot, but riding in a chariot, surrounded by other men on horses and in chariots, carrying gifts and money. We can imagine someone arriving in our time at a hospital for treatment with a motorcade and a limousine holding a briefcase of cash. Give me the best. To the prophet Elisha, these symbols of status and promises of payment weren't impressive. Despite the comfortable ride and the symbols of status, our fragile bodies are all the same. To some extent, the hospital gown equalizes us. And yet, Naaman's worldly power brought him to the door of Elisha's house. Just as money and insurance plans and means of influence dramatically change our access to quality health care every day. I wonder what would have happened if one of Naaman's servants had come down with that spot of leprosy. Surely the king wouldn't have issued a visa for him or her to cross into Samaria, and there would have been no horse to ride. Oh, well, what can you do? Would have probably been the response. Privilege has strong undercurrents, and so does poverty. Sometimes we stumble across the gospel when we least expect it. Last week, our family visited the Boston Children's Museum, and there were two signs in one of the play and learning areas. The first said, "Systemic injustice leads to oppression." I was impressed to see this in the Children's Museum, but the second really astounded me. It said the same thing, but reversed the direction. Systemic justice leads to liberation. Yes, I love that. We need to be a part of that. That is our work as the church, justice that grows up from the roots of everything that leads to liberation. Jesus said when he declared his mission in Luke's gospel in chapter 4, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Naaman waited at Elisha's door, but the sought-after prophet did not come out to meet him. Instead, he sent out a messenger who handed him a prescription. Go to the Jordan River and wash 7 times. Naaman stomped away and raged. He expected Elisha to come out and honor him by performing a grand display of healing, crying out to God and waving his hands. Understandably, Naaman felt slighted. First, he's encountered the stripping power of illness, and now he's denied a face-to-face interview with the famous prophet. Instead, when the rivers of his homeland Damascus were so much more impressive, Elisha sent him to the less astounding and in some places muddy looking Jordan. Having grown up canoeing and swimming in a muddy looking river myself, the Withlacoochee River in Florida, I can tell you that sometimes you do come out feeling a little less clean than when you went in. It wasn't a polluted river, but it was a muddy river because the sand was always being stirred up. I'm still not sure, looking back at my childhood, how I came out alive, realizing now as an adult how many alligators live in those rivers. That was my playground. I would swim in it heedless of danger. The solution Naaman is given is counterintuitive. It feels simple and meaningless. And this makes it all the more challenging for him. At least if Elisha had given him a difficult task to achieve, like climb that mountain and fast for 40 days and 40 nights, he would have felt valorous and worthy. To rinse in the lackluster Jordan at the instruction of a servant requires only one thing, and that is humility. Humility doesn't mean lessening our self-worth, but having a true sense of ourselves in relationship to others, understanding that we are all of equal delight to God. Therefore, being able to put our desires in perspective to others and what they need and want. We might doubt whether Naaman is capable of humility, except for what happens next. And this is my favorite part of the story. Naaman's servants come to him and advise him to try what the prophet has suggested, and he listens to his servants. This advice didn't come from a king or even a fellow soldier. It came from his servants, and Naaman was willing to change his perspective because of their advice. And that willingness to listen saves his life. And in another act of humility, he changes course from his anger. He collects himself and he pivots. Sometimes once we have committed to anger, it is hard to let go of it, even when we want to. Our 6-year-old Leo has a toy. It's a downhill truck race for 2 small monster trucks with obstacles to drive through and over. You see which truck gets to the bottom first. The first obstacle is a gate, kind of like this. Whichever truck gets there first crashes the gate open and gets to go ahead. But the other day, Leo was in tears because half of the gate broke off its hinge, and he asked me to tape it. I explained that I couldn't tape the gate on because where the peg was broken. I could tape it, but if I did, it would never swivel again, and the trucks couldn't push it open. So instead, they would get stuck. That gate, if it can't open and close, becomes useless. Just so for us, that ability to pivot, to change course is essential for being a whole person with positive relationships. We have to be able to turn. Coincidentally, I didn't go looking for this. I saw the first episode of a food travel show this week called Somebody Feed Phil. It's fun because you get to see different parts of the world and how they eat, and you get really hungry and you want to cook. In this episode, the host was in Mexico City and he was trying authentic tacos. And the chef told him that Americans tend to make a critical mistake when they eat tacos and tortas. We turn the taco sideways and try to eat it, but then everything spills out. Instead, he said, we should keep the taco upright and turn our heads. He said something like this: we have necks and they are made to bend, right? The spiritual lesson is similar. We have plans and ideas and first drafts, and they are made to bend. We have wills, and they are made to bend. Naaman needed to be humble and flexible and malleable in order to receive this life-giving gift. Naaman's dip into muddy water reoriented him to the reality that despite his powerful position, his victories, his prestige, he was simply a human being like everyone else. Elisha reminded him that the titles and the status were illusions. To get into that water, he had to accept ordinary treatment. The biblical writers don't tell us any more stories about Naaman. In fact, he isn't mentioned again until Luke chapter 4, when Jesus references him just after that passage about setting free the oppressed. But we can imagine and hope that after the experience with the leprosy and the muddy water, Naaman was more humble, more understanding that we are all of equal worth despite security and power and title, those things we accumulate over time. Do you ever drive too fast over the speed bumps on the west side of Providence, or the speed humps, I should call them? They're huge speed humps. I love them, by the way, because I have small children, and I love that people have to slow down, and I have to slow down. But if I clocked it this week, if I go 7 or lower, I'm okay. But if I go more than 7 miles an hour on our street, that bump is something terrible, especially for the little people in the back seat. It's just, it shakes the whole car. When we are cushioned by privilege, as I realize that I am, our ideas of how things work can be skewed. We often fail to see where others who don't have cushions of education and savings accounts and nearby family and majority ethnicity are hit hard with the speed bumps, with the speed humps of life. Those things that are gentle blows to us are rough shocks to others. To counter this unawareness, we need to train our sight and our understanding by listening with humility to the stories of other people. And sometimes we need dips into muddy water, experiences that reorient us to reality and bring us back to our awareness of shared humanity and help us develop empathy for the experiences of others who have been devalued or excluded or had opportunities taken from them. Perhaps we need to find ourselves somewhere where we can't speak the majority language. Perhaps entering a church and feeling unwelcome. Perhaps being treated with suspicion for filling a prescription with Medicaid. Today, I pray that whenever we lose sight of the struggles of others, if we begin to think that we uniquely deserve the comforts that gladden our lives and forget to seek the genuine welfare of all God's children, we will seek out ways to dip and be washed in muddy waters that make us real and humble and empathetic. Amen.